Welcome, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
So we had done all the Rashis on Parshat, um, uh, Parshat Yitro, dealing with the Ten Commandments. It's not a very long Parsha, but we did cover all the Rashis on that Parsha. And so you can, in fact, find it on this website. If you type in the search Yitro, Y-I-T-R-O, you will find all the lessons involved in that. So when we've done all those, we go to Torah T'mimah itself and take a look at some of the things that he has to say. And we're just simply going in order. And so we are actually, if I can get this to move over, seem to be stuck. Oh, there we go. Um, from Genesis, and we're actually in Parshat Lech Lecha, and we've done the Torah T'mimahs on this, and this is the passage where it says, "Your name shall be Abraham." Originally, of course, his name is Abram, and we are looking at the various interpretations of this word Abraham, right? So, vaya shimcha Avraham. Your name shall be Abraham. Amar Rami bar Abba, said Rami bar Abba, Ketiv Avram, it's in the Torah, it's written Avram, Uchtiv Avraham, and it also is written Avraham. We see both names written in the Torah. Batchila, initially, Himlicho HaKadosh Baruch Hu Amatayim va'arba'im u'shlosha Evrahim. Originally, the Holy One, blessed be He, made him ruler over 243 limbs. Okay, we'll explain what this is meaning. Ulevasof imlicho al matayim va'arba'im u'shmona evarim. And in the end, he made him ruler over 248 limbs. For Eluhen, so what are these additional limbs? Five limbs. Shte einaim, two eyes, ushte oznaim, and two ears, verosh hagviah, and the male organ. In other words, the penis. Control over those things. So let's take a look at what Torah T'mimah has to say about that. So first of all, Ritzono Lomar, Elu Heina Nosafim, in other words, mentioning those additional five are the additional organs. V'n'esa misparam b'saf hakol ramach, so that the total, if you add these five to 243, you get 248. Keminyan otiyot Avraham. In other words, if you look at the Gematria, that is the value of the letters of Avraham, you get 248. Let's take a look. So Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, so that's a total of 3. Resh is 200, so that's 203. And Hey is 5, so that's 208. And Mem is 40, so 248. So that's the implication, right? The illusion of the name Abraham, 248. Umikodem, and before, Haya Hamispar Rish Mem Gimel, 243, Keminyan Otiot Avram. So again, if we take the Hay out of the total of Avraham, which was 248, Hay is 5, and if you subtract 5 from 248, you get 243. So what, right? Ve'inyan hamlucha al elu ha'ivarim. And what do we mean by saying that he had dominion over these particular limbs? Pirshu HaTosafot, the Tosafot explained, Shebetchila, that originally, Imlicho HaKadosh Baruch Hu al ha'ivarim shehem birshuto shel adam, that he gave him dominion over the limbs which are under a person's control, that the other limbs we are able to control. That is so. We can control relatively easily what our hands are doing, what our feet are doing, etc., etc. He gave him the control of them. Lehizaher me'avera, and what do we mean by having control? To be careful against committing sins, right? To doing things that are wrong. But afterwards, המליכו גם האיברים שאינם ברשותו של אדם. But afterwards, God gave him the dominion over those limbs which are not under a person's control, right? Lirot, that is, what you're looking at, or to what you see, we don't have control necessarily over that. Velishmoa, or to what we listen or what we hear, or laharher, that has to do with essentially to fantasize and to lust. Becholze nesa adon. He, in all of these, he became the master. Gam alehem, also over them, ulehishtamesh bam rak ledavar mitzvah, and to utilize them only for the sake of performing commandments. Well, this, in some ways, is a summary. It puts in a metaphoric kind of way a point that I made about what Judaism is about and what the discipline of the religion is about. And that is to teach us to have control over our appetites. And this is, in a way, summarized by God, by this particular interpretation of God changing Abram's name to Abraham, that we actually are trained, and you could say that mitzvot such as kashrut and Shabbat, in fact, all the mitzvot are there to train us, to dedicate ourselves to acting in ways that are not sinful or criminal or those kinds of things. That is the idea, that we can control what we put in our mouths. That's something we can control. On the other hand, we know that other kinds of urges, right, pornography, things like that, can become very, very addictive. And that, unfortunately, utilizing our intelligence and the capacity we have as human beings to actually be great is unfortunately, it's reduced when we allow ourselves to get caught in that. But at the same time, it's saying this isn't an easy thing. To say initially that they're not under a person's control, it's saying that. And on the other hand, it's saying that Abraham, who we understand was the first Jew, right, was given that ability. And by extension, Abraham's descendants. And the fact that we're willing to not act one of my favorite phrases, which is, ain't no one gonna tell me what to do, and to switch things around and find a way to act modestly. So, if you'd like to comment on that before we move on to the next one, I'm happy to hear any questions or comments. Next, all right. Av Hamon Goyim. Yes.
If I
Me?
may, just out of curiosity, on the 243, is there
Yes.
any explanation of those beyond it being the Gematria?
Yeah, it's saying it would include the five that I mentioned.
Oh, I understand. No, but if you take away the five, you go back to 243. What
Right.
was he before?
So
Is there any commentary on that that you can recall?
not that I'm aware of.
Okay,
It wouldn't mean that he wasn't behaving himself.
sure.
It just means the
No,
idea is you can struggle with these things. The idea is that he would have success with them.
right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, unless I'm misunderstanding your question, but
No, well,
yeah.
it's just that, oftentimes with a Gematria,
Yes.
it's explaining some characteristic or some situation. And the gematria of 243, which is Avram before he became
Right.
Abraham.
Right.
Question is there discussion of that number 243
Right.
anywhere
Okay.
that you
I,
that
I
you
hear
were
you.
not necessarily Torah T'mimah, but
Right, of course. I'm not aware of it. I
Okay.
think the fact, at least the way I take this sentence is it's somewhat self-explanatory and the point it's trying to make. And the reason why they even get to 243 Mead, if you think about it, is because of the 248. If they
Okay.
didn't
They
want to get to the 248, they wouldn't have
sure.
mentioned the 243.
So they work backwards. Okay.
I
That's
would
fine.
say so. I would say so.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
No, that's
But I
good.
think, but I think it's also an interesting coincidence that Avram is 243, right?
Hmm.
If Avram had somehow been a different name, right? If it had been Aram, right? They
It
would have
wouldn't
had to
have
come up. They
turned
would
out
have had
right.
to come up with two other limbs.
Okay.
Okay,
Well, anyway, all right.
right.
Very, very good. Thank you.
Okay, you bet.
Sure.
Going on. So of Hamon Goyim, let's take a look at the original sense just to get some context. Velo yikare od et shimcha Avram, no longer will your name be called Avram. V'haya shimcha Avraham, your name will now be Abraham. Ki av hamon goyim netatiha. So it's saying, for I have made you the father, right, the patriarch of many, many nations, right? A multitude of nations. I've set you as a multitude of nations. So, and it obviously here is a play on words of Avraham, right? That's the point, is that this name Avram, because Avram would be of Aram, okay, just the patriarch of Aram, but now it's Avraham, and that hey is clearly suggesting now that it's Hamon Goyim. And there's a really cool point here. Okay. Here we go. Av Hamon Goyim. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, said Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, I will tell you, is a major player in the Talmud, and I believe he is attributed to a great extent with the authorship of the Jerusalem Talmud. He was an Amorah. He was a teacher. It was called Palestine at the time because the Romans did not want to allow it to be called Judea, but that's where he lived. He lived essentially what would be we call the land of Israel today, as opposed to Babylonia. Major Jewish, two major Jewish communities. And of course, the Talmud that we generally study is the one that was developed in Babylonia. However, I can tell you that Rabbi Yochanan is mentioned many, many times in the Babylonian Talmud as well. At any rate, Rabbi Yochanan said, Minayin litlashon notarikon mina Torah. How do we have a concept of a notarikon? I won't translate it for a second, but we will deal with it from the Torah. In other words, how do we know that we have this idea of notarikon in the Torah itself, that it isn't something outside the Torah? And essentially, you'll see, we're talking about shorthand. Retzono lomar. So now what's he really saying? Elu han, sorry. Inyan notarikon, who what we're talking about, the issue of a notarikon is ki lifnim bimei malchut Yavan veromi, that many years ago during the reign of the Greeks and the Romans, right, that early Greek and Roman period, hayu nohagin be'et chipazon, they had a custom when they were in a hurry or milchama, or in a situation of war, lichtov b'kitzur, to write in an abbreviated way, right? Tevot shlamot, complete words, v'gam inyanim shleimim, and also complete concepts. They would write it b'otiot achadot, with one letter or one, with just individual letters. So complete words and complete ideas even might be taken care of with this, just a simple letter as a shorthand. Vahaya lahem al zeh simanim v'ramazim, and they had, in order to achieve this, they had certain signs and indications. But sionim, again, these are all like signs and symbols and stuff like that, kfuim. They had been established. In other words, they knew. I remember my mother-in-law, blessed memory, Mildred Bayless, knew stenography. She knew shorthand, and uh, and I remember that there was a hook that was known as a shun hook. In other words, that it was like commotion. So you could write whatever the shorthand was for commo, and then you'd write a hook, and that would indicate Tion. And it was called a shun hook. Okay. Uvismanenu, and in our own times, Yadua inyan zeh, we understand this concept. B'shem, and here we go. Stenography. That's what it is. Umefaresh kan, and here it's explained, minayin remez b'Torah lenotarikon. Where do we have an allusion in the Torah itself regarding stenography, right? This shorthand. Klomar, that is to say, she'inyanim v'rayonot shleimim, that is to say, that matters and complete concepts, yuchlalu be'otiyot achadot, can be contained in individual letters. So that's the question, right? And that we're answering here. Going on. But Rashi and Rashi, the Parshat Yitro in the Parsha of Yitro. So at least we have a reference to the Parsha that we're reading this week in the Torah, right? But Pasuk Lema'an Yarichun Yamecha in the regarding the verse that says, "In order that your days be long." This is, of course, the commandment to honor your mother and father, right? Right, in order that your days be long. Hevid Rasha, right, that he brings an interpretation, mi mechilta, from the mechilta, v'im lav, and if you don't, yitkatzrun, your days will be shortened. In other words, you do this in order that your days be long, and if you don't do this, it doesn't say it, right? But we understand that if you don't do this, then your days will be shortened. Shekain divrei Torah nidrashim miklal hein love umiklal love hein. Why? Because when you the words of Torah can be inferred, right? They can be inferred from a positive concept. You can infer the negative, and from a negative concept, you can infer the positive. So the positive concept is to honor your father and mother. The negative concept is not to honor your father and mother. And you can make whatever reference, right? So if in fact honoring your mother and father means that your days will be lengthened, then not honoring your father and mother means your days won't be lengthened. They'll be shortened. And in various other examples. V'hosif al zeh v'zeh leshono. And to that comment he added, and this is his word, we're going to quote, Divrei Torah notarikon heim. He said, the words of Torah are notarikon, are shorthand, they're shorthand. Nidrashim miklal hein lav umiklal lav hein. In other words, they can be interpreted from a positive concept, a negative result, umiklal lav hein, and from a negative concept, a positive one. The opposite, right? Ad kan l'shana, end of quote. V'tameh ani, and I'm amazed. Shekine inyan drasha, that he described this kind of drasha kazo, that this kind of interpretation, b'shem notarikon, that he referred to it as a notarikon. Ki halo regilin anu lefaresh notarikon, because we normally explain this concept of a notarikon, inyan hanirmaz berashe tevot, something that is alluded to with Rashi Tevot, the beginning, the first letters of a word, right? In other words, like an acronym, right? Uva otiyot achaydot, or with just certain letters. V'ke'ein hadrasha lefanenu, just as we explained in the drasha that we quoted from Rabbi Yochanan. Aval lo inyan maleh, but not this complete concept, kidrishat ha-mechilta ha-niskeret, like this interpretation of the mechilta. We don't apply notarikon to something like this, where you say from the negative you can refer the positive. It's got to do with specific letters, right? And how you decide they stand for complete words and complete concepts. So, so he's saying puzzled at Rashi's comment. But he does have an answer. And one has to say, the ikar inyan notarikon hu gilui inyan haba midvarim meforashim bekitzur. So I'm going to translate all of that. Okay. One has to say that the main point, right? The ikar, the main point, inyan notarikon, when we look at the concept of a notarikon, it is Gilui means the revelation, literally, right, of something which comes from haba midvarim for Hashem bekitzur, some things that are expressed is in an abbreviated kind of way, right? So what we're saying is the idea of getting a whole concept from a brief statement. V'lachein, and for this reason, kol inyan hanitgale mima'amar satum. Anything that you can then derive from something that is satum, that is literally satum means closed or covered up. In other words, the point about inferring a negative from a positive is all it states is the positive. But the fact, what he's trying to say is that the Torah is implicitly and in some ways explicitly saying exactly that point. That when the Torah is stating something in a positive way, it wants you to understand also the negative. Hein mima amar shalem, whether from a total statement like the one miklal lav shomin, shomin hein, right? Vehein me'otiot ramazim ba'alma, or whether from letters or other kinds of allusions. Hakol bichlal shem zeh. You can include all of these with the concept of notarikon. In other words, where something is stated explicitly, and there are other things that you can then derive from it automatically, or at least, well, in the case of the Miklal Lav Shomin Hain, etc., is in some ways a logical thing, whereas the idea of the letters or the signs, etc., sounds like it's something that's simply arbitrarily decided, etc., but regardless, being able to infer something whole from something that is just there and is in just an abbreviated way is the idea of notaricum. And that's where we'll leave things, at least for today, in terms of our Torah T'mimah, with the hopes that we can go on. Let's see, wait a second. All right. Well, actually, we need to go on, right? Here goes. Okay. Aleph Bet of Hamun, right? So he's saying, look at this. Aleph Bet Hey Mem Vav Nun. Av Netaticha Le'omot. So I have given you as a father to the nations. So here's the Aleph, right? The Aleph stands for Av Netaticha Le'omot. I have made you the patriarch of nations. We'll do just a little more. Kemoshe Katuv v'hayita la'avam goyim. And simply saying, that's exactly what it says when it says in the text, you shall become the father of many nations. Right? So we're saying that Av Hamon, right? Bet, so now the bet of Av Hamon, the bet stands for Netaticha, Bechur Netaticha Bo'omot. I've made you the elect of amongst the nations. Let's take a look here and see what he says. Kemoshe Katuv, it states elsewhere in Nehemiah chapter 9, Atem hu, so it looks at Atahu ha-Elohim, you are the God, Asher Bacharta Abram, who chose Abraham. So that's Bachur, right? Your choice. V'yen b'samuch ot tetzayin, and he says we'll comment on this further in the note of 16. So that's that. So I think I do want to stop here for today and continue this tomorrow and finish this up tomorrow. Okay, let's just go here. I'm going to get rid of this and let me put this in here. Just mark out place and we'll pick this up. I'm looking to see if I can do this. Okay, for some reason, this is not, it's doing something different. Okay, I will mess around with this later on. I'm going to stop the share. Okay. Straightforward, but
Yeah.
gives us a little depth.
Very good.
Any thoughts? David, sometimes I know you come up with stuff. Judith? Kathy? Okay. Harlan? Hope you're doing okay. Very good. All right, I'll stop the recording.